Hello and welcome to Top Story. The people of Algeria are still reeling today from Tuesday's two bomb blasts in the capital Algiers, which have claimed at least 62 lives. It's thought that both attacks were the work of suicide bombers. Responsibility for the explosions has been claimed by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the North African branch of Al-Qaeda. The first attack blew apart a bus packed with students near the Supreme Court, while the second devastated the offices of the United Nations Commission of Refugees and the UN Development Programme, which is situated in a residential district of Algiers. This year has witnessed a series of suicide bomb attacks in Algeria. In April, 33 people died in a triple attack in the capital. In July, suicide bombers killed 9 soldiers in an attack on a barracks. And in September, a spate of bombings killed almost 60 people. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb claimed responsibility. The government, though, has been hitting back, killing the organisation's second-in-command and chief explosives expert in October. Well, joining me now from Hamburg in Germany to discuss what's going on in Algeria is Dirk Labs, a journalist and expert on terrorism. Thanks very much for being on Top Story. Dirk, just how serious a threat to stability in Algeria is Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb?
I think it's a pretty serious threat, as we could see yesterday through the two bomb attacks. The interesting part is that the security services in Algeria told again and again over the past years that the threat is over and that they are in control of the situation and that they have arrested most of the leaders and the members. And the GSPC, or Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, always manages to strike again. And so that's a very threatening situation for Algeria.
How much popular support, though, does this organisation have? Because the government, as you said, keeps emphasising that it's in control of the situation, that popular support is limited, that this isn't like the civil war scenario in the 1990s in Algeria. This is a group which is pretty much in a minority.
I think in that respect the government is right. I don't think that the popular support is pretty big. I mean, I've been to Algeria late last year, and if you drive around the country does have other problems, and it's a very poor country, even though they have a lot of gas and oil resources. You see a lot of unemployed people basically sitting around on the street. I don't think that they support a terrorist organization like that. And they killed a lot of students yesterday in this bus. So when the jihad killed civilians in the 90s, the public turned against them. So I don't think that the support, is pretty big for Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. But the problem is the terrorists don't need public support to strike.
So this has nothing to do, in other words, with the civil conflict of the 1990s. The roots of this, the roots of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, are something completely different.
Yeah, I think it has nothing to do with the civil war. We don't even know how strong the organization is. If you look at Al-Qaeda prior to 9/11, you can really see that they were really weak prior to the strike in New York and Washington. But even a weak terrorist organization can pull through with something enormous like 9/11. So that just because a group is diminished doesn't mean it's less dangerous. So I really think that what we see here are maybe like the veteran fighters, some new recruits that fight their own small terror war against the government, and you cannot compare it with the civil war in the 90s, where I think 200,000 people died in Algeria alone. So I don't think that's comparable.
Earlier this year, there were similar incidents, albeit on a smaller scale, in Morocco and elsewhere in the Maghreb. Is there a danger, do you think, that this organisation's operations could spread throughout the Maghreb?
That's really an interesting point. If you look at operations in Tunisia and Morocco and Mauritania and Mali, there are connections, and most of the money and the recruiters and the logistic people are coming from Algeria. There are reports that Algerians are recruiting fighters in Tunisia and in Morocco, that there has been explosives smuggled from Algeria to Morocco. So that's all. It looks like Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb or the GSPC tries to be something like a regional force. So that's very interesting. And there were Libyans arrested in Algeria and Tunisia. So there's sort of a regional network being built up.
The United Nations said yesterday that it had no doubt that it had been targeted by this bomb. Is that how you read it as well?
Yeah, you know, I mean, for Islamist terrorists, United Nations are like something like the world government, even though we know it's not true. But, you know, that's sort of the biggest insult for Islamists, because they think that that God should rule the world and human beings should obey the, you know, God's rules and not set up something like a world government. That's why they, as we could see in Iraq as well, continuously striking the United Nations. If you look at statements by bin Laden or other leading Islamist terrorists, really, the United Nations is one of their prime targets, even though for us it's somewhat disturbing to understand.
France, too, seems to be a particular target. In September, this organization put out a video calling for Algerians to drive the French and the Spaniards out of Algeria. Presumably that's because of the French colonial connection with Algeria?
Absolutely. If you look at the news statement, I think there's a sentence in that statement, you know, which was put on the internet yesterday, which says something like, "This is for the sons of France." You know, of course, there you can see it. The attacks yesterday are rooted in the history between the GIA and later the GSPC and France. So that's why it's not like a global Al-Qaeda plot. It's still a very local plot run by Algerians to sort of follow Algerian targets and goals with that attack.
How much do we know then about the organization? You say it's very much a local Algerian group. How much do we really know about it and its aims?
Well, it's still a mystery. I mean, the biggest, what we know is there are less than 1,000 fighters. As I said earlier, the government authorities repeatedly have been telling us that, you know, this organization is dead and all its leaders are captured. Yet, you know, in 2006 alone, they disarmed 400 fighters. And sort of regroup them in civilian life. So we assume that there are like a couple of hundred fighters, GSPC veterans. Some of them are now going to the Iraq. And sadly to say, because I am German, they have financed basically through money given to them by the German government for kidnapped tourists in 2003, 5 million euros. You know, that's a lot of money for terrorist organizations. So that's basically one of the main sources of financing here.
Okay, and that's where we're going to have to end it, I'm afraid. Thanks to our guest, Dirk Labs. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.